Hi everyone, I'm Vivian Ly, and today I want to talk to you about spaces, about occupying spaces, embodying spaces, sharing spaces, and about creating spaces. We are all a part of many spaces, at school, at work, at home, and in our communities. There's the physical space of land, water, air, buildings, and roads. There's the social space that we create with one another through language and communication. There's the internal space that we occupy in our own bodies and minds. And then there's the external spaces that we share with everyone else. These spaces all come with their own structures and their own rules too. And unless you live in the wilderness all on your own, you spend most of your time living in shared human-made spaces. These are human-made structures, human-made rules. And the good thing about this is if we understand that our built environment and social environment are created by people, then we know that these are things that people can change. They can be improved, things can be thrown out. Assumptions, rules, and structures can be completely upended if they don't serve our needs. The beauty of inclusion and access is then to struggle together to create spaces that meet the needs of everyone, particularly those who have been traditionally excluded from spaces. I'm speaking about disabled people, of course, but also racialized people, women, low-income and homeless people, LGBTQ people, children and elders, fat people, immigrants and refugees, those of us living at the margins and the margins of margins. I want to bring up two common mistakes when designing and creating inclusive spaces. The first is simple: not listening to disabled people. So much of disability activism is telling people that the thing that you just did there to help disabled people actually hurts us. This gets in the way of real progress when so much of disabled people's energies is devoted to correcting well-meaning but ultimately harmful attempts at inclusion. An example of this are newfangled disability gadgets like gloves that purportedly translate ASL into English, when deaf and hard of hearing people have been speaking up for ages that what they need is actually better access to ASL interpreters and better access to ASL language education. Or stair climbing wheelchairs, when the real issue is that the built environment relies so heavily on stairs, and that there's a choice on the architect's part to not include things like ramps or elevators. An expensive, clunky stair climbing wheelchair is no use to someone like me who can rarely climb stairs because of chronic pain, but doesn't use a wheelchair, or a parent with a stroller, or a worker with a rolling cart, for that matter. As well, there's the whole issue concerning the dominance of behavioral intervention for autistic people in our schools, in therapy clinics, in our homes. Increasingly, autistic people are speaking up about the long-term trauma that comes from the use of rewards and punishment to teach compliance to neurotypical standards. Research is starting to reflect what we've been saying all along, that suppressing natural autistic traits like intense interests or stimming, passing as normal or whatever normal is, takes a huge emotional toll, one linked to our incredibly high suicide risk. There's a real harm that can result from wanting to make an autistic person indistinguishable from a neurotypical peer, when it's absolutely possible to be a happy, thriving autistic person, and an autistically happy person, if you will. Autistic people are calling instead for more supports and therapies that work with autistic traits rather than against them. So, when attempts at inclusion go wrong, really it's when they promote segregation, compliance, control, at the loss of dignity, autonomy, choice, and freedom to be ourselves. Notice that these failed attempts are often entirely focused on the individual, putting the onus on the disabled person to accommodate abled people, rather than ensuring that our spaces are built for all. They are Band-Aid solutions, rather than long-term commitments. Okay, Vivian, you say, I get it. Listen to disabled people. Change the environment, not the person. What else? The second big mistake when creating inclusive spaces is thinking about inclusion only on one axis. For example, I'm not just disabled, I'm also Cantonese. As an adult, trying to reconnect with my local Cantonese community, I encounter stairs-only routes to meeting spaces, harsh migraine-inducing fluorescent lights, expectations to conform to neurotypical social standards, and a lack of understanding about autism in general. However, after I was diagnosed with autism, I also sought out other autistic and disabled people to connect with. But I found these spaces, these disability spaces, to be overwhelmingly white. Black, Indigenous, people of color, mixed-race people are no less likely to be disabled than white people. So why are there so few people of color in disability spaces? Soon enough, I encountered both overt and covert forms of racism, which pushed me out of many of these spaces. Of course, these issues about access are not unique to Chinese community spaces, and these issues about racism are not unique to disability spaces. But let me tell you, it's so hard to find a space that will hold even two of my identities dealing with race and disability, let alone one that will embrace and make space for someone who is also a queer person, a survivor, and a child of refugees. There lies the danger of thinking about inclusion only on one axis, of not accounting for those of us who find ourselves in the intersections of multiple communities. So I'm going to throw some questions at you to think about. Who's not in the room? Even right now, here as we speak about inclusion in this very space, who is not in this room? And what do we lose from that? For those of us who are in the room, who's comfortable and safe and who is not? Who has to contort and mold themselves painfully to fit into the majority? Who is part of the majority? Do they even realize that they're part of the majority? And finally, who is creating these spaces? Is it made with us, by us, or without us? There's a slogan among disability activists, nothing about us without us. I'll say that again, nothing about us without us. So spaces are really important to me. Inclusion and access to spaces where decisions are being made are important to me, because that's just the first step. If disabled people can't even enter a room and get a seat at that table, how are we going to address pressing issues such as the high rates of homelessness and unemployment among disabled people? How are we going to address the fact that disabled people face horrific abuse and neglect in institutions and neo-institutions, sometimes even their own families? How are we going to address the incredibly high risk of suicide in autistic adults, a shocking greater than 70%? How are we going to address the additional disparities for disabled women, disabled people of color, LGBTQ disabled people? How are we going to create not only access, but also create changes in the conditions that made the inaccessibility in the first place? And disabled people do need a seat at that table. More than that, we need to make the table ours, full of everyday, average disabled people. Non-disabled parents and allies may have great input to share, but they can't replace autistic and disabled voices and leadership. A wide variety of disabled people need to be enacting this change, not just disabled people, and not even just a subset of disabled people. Again, nothing about us without us. We are the real experts of our own lived experiences. And when that expertise is called upon, valuing our work includes paying for it, paying us for it, because it is work. It's not something to be taken for granted. Inclusion in this sense isn't charity. It's our human right to be heard, to have our work recognized as work, and to be in societal spaces that have excluded us in the past and continue to exclude us today. Okay, so spaces are important to me because to me, they are centers of change. They're where we create community and share our lives with each other. Creating spaces is loving one another. It's saying, I see you, I honor you. Creating an inclusive space intentionally, no matter how small or how big, is so, so important. And it takes all of us, because we all create spaces by the virtue of being in them and acting in them. I'll leave you with one last question. What kind of space are you going to make?